You brought up Keynesian. Now I'm excited. Now we're getting into the hardest stuff that I love. Yeah, I think I keep hearing people say it's the way to decentralize currency and kind of take power away from the fiat currency that we're currently on. We're seeing it with record inflation, which is why everything's costing more because of the fact that we're not connected to anything. We're just printing money left and right. Okay, so Bitcoin is digital gold. Before we segue into central bank digital currency, is it still a good idea to invest in Dogecoin, or is that not a good idea anymore?
Well, I can't give financial advice, but I would say there are other.
Invest in Lunar Crush.
Okay.
There's other cryptocurrencies that have other aspects and values to them and features to them, that Bitcoin does not. I probably can't sit here and advocate to go, sell your house and buy a bunch of Dogecoin. But if buying a little bit of Dogecoin gets your foot in the door of understanding what blockchain technology is and understanding, trying to focus on, your financial future in a way, right? Like we're not teaching kids in middle school how to use credit cards and what, an inverted yield curve is. And like even some of the most basic financial education that's out there is not like given to this, Gen Z or even the younger like kids that are coming up. I think that cryptocurrencies and specifically Dogecoin and, some of the altcoins that are out there are really interesting kind of instruments that people could learn a little bit about finance, right? So if you're going to take $10 or you're going to take $100 or whatever your unit of, risk is, I think it's totally fine to kind of understand what these things are about and make up your mind yourself on what these things are, as opposed to a lot of people do go into these kind of like tribal camps when it comes to crypto and like Bitcoin only and like Bitcoiners and then crypto altcoins and DeFi. And then you can just go down this rabbit hole. I say, go find out yourself. Obviously don't risk your entire life savings in anything. You should always stay diversified.
I'll keep that in mind next time I talk to my financial advisor. Awesome about Dogecoin.
All in on Dogecoin.
all in on Dogecoin and silver. All right, so hard pivot now to central bank digital currency. I think we have a good idea of crypto and where that is. A lot of people, some people asked on a podcast pre-show, what the heck is a CBDC? I have a vague idea of what the plan is or what the idea is, but why don't you describe your take on central bank digital currency?
Sure. So I think people need to understand most dollars, like 98% of dollars are digital, right? They currently are. They're in they're at Chase Bank, they're at Bank of America. They're somewhere they're digital. They're not in like cash, right? Very few dollars actually are. The difference though between that and potentially a central bank digital currency is that those dollars are held at a bank, right? Or they're held in stocks or bonds or some sort of brokerage account, right? And those dollars, yes, they're issued by the U.S. government, right? Congress has to sign off, and we have spending bills, and more dollars can come into circulation. But those dollars, technically, your bank knows where you're spending those dollars. They have records, and there's a ledger at each of those banks, but that's a level abstracted from direct government access to that, right? And so, a central bank digital currency, there's a paper written last year, and they talked about what would this potentially look like. And what it would look like is a dollar that's directly issued from the government onto potentially a blockchain that would be completely run by the U.S. government or any governments that are out there. So you would just be having a dollar, maybe not in a bank account, maybe in a bank account, or maybe just in the Federal Reserve or your U.S. government app, right? And it just has like dollars in there. And so those dollars, though, would be tied to some sort of blockchain, right? So that you can't double spend them, like we talked about at the beginning, right? You can't double spend it. And so what comes with that, though, like whenever you interface with any sort of digital app, or whenever you interface with like a website that's out there, all those kind of standard footprint things that come with interacting online would come with it, right? You need to open up that US government app, right? You need to open it up from your phone, and your phone now has your location, right? It has your speed that you're traveling. It knows if you've dropped your phone. It knows what other potential apps are running on your phone at that any given time. If you've got some Google software out there too, they know where you've been. So a lot of like the data sharing that's out there is suddenly and potentially opened up to this kind of centralized source. And so basically it's just a dollar that's just directly issued and held with the US government that you have access to, not even potentially that you own. And so that's, I think, where, I mean, just explaining it like that, I think people probably understand, like, okay, that seems pretty scary, right? And so, if you could, you can steel man it for a minute and say, well, what potentially would be some good things about a CBDC, right? Like, so say the government did need to issue like emergency funds or something to an individual, or potentially, if they're going to give over $700 to people in Lahaina, right? They could just, basically, bam, they can send cash directly to people, so they can potentially react faster to a lot of those things that are out there. They can, they could cut off fraud probably a lot quicker. If someone's sending money to a country or a terrorist group or individuals, and those are digital dollars, CBDCs, they could potentially cut access to those things. So there are some, I think those are the ways that they'll probably pitch that to be positive. So I could stop if you guys have any questions about what exactly it is, but if you think about it, it's just the same thing as like any other cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, but issued by the US government and held with the US government.
Yeah, I guess if you propose it to people and if you say, well, the government's going to be able to see your transactions, they're going to be able to see that. A lot of people will believe, well, the government can kind of see all your stuff anyway, so what's the big deal? But correct me if I'm wrong, it's sort of, there's that layer of privacy because you're with a bank, and there's this legal protection of, well, if you want to get access to my bank records, you're going to have to go through legal channels. You're going to have to go to court. You're going to have to get a court order. You're going to have to get a subpoena. But this kind of removes that barrier, correct? So the government will just always be able to peep in on, like, what are you buying? Like, what did you spend on? Oh, did you buy a firearm? Did you spend too much on gas this month? Like, is that sort of the concern, is that wall of privacy and legal protection will kind of fall down with this central bank digital currency?
It's kind of the idea. Obviously, they would probably say, hey, we're going to create maybe a government agency, and that government agency, kind of like maybe like a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac with mortgages, is a government agency, but it's kind of slightly different. I'm not sure exactly how they would kind of pull it off, but yes, like you do have the checks and balances of one layer of abstraction different by being at a bank, right? And so the bank does know like where you're spending, but there's free markets. You can be with multiple banks and you can spend money with multiple credit cards. And, someone would need to basically triangulate a lot of things to figure something out. And it's just do you want a bank account with the US government? Like, that's the question that you should be asking. Like, hey, I want all my money with the US government. Right. And like, can they, now that they would have an off switch, I think that's where the slippery slope comes into play, where people could start to get a little scared. Like, hey, like, Phil, looks like you bought too many, like Coors Lights this month. Like, your social score, like, we're going to turn that off. Or like, hey, you're buying too much and eating too much meat. We're going to turn that off. There's this kind of level there that I think scares people when it comes to this. Now, if you're going to ask my personal opinion on whether or not I think a CBDC is coming, I actually don't think it's coming. I think when you think about the banking system today and how that works and how much money is in the banking system, how much money, if you're Jamie Dimon and you're running Chase, like, do you want all of that kind of power and money to be slipping over to someone else potentially, right? And sure, maybe they can come up with some sort of idea around or plan around, the banks will still be holding some of this, right? But there'll always be a backdoor to the government, right? And so I think that's, I think that the uphill battle is too much. Also, when you're, the number one superpower and your currency is used, for petrodollars, and we have a lot of strength in the US currency in the way that it is, the way that it's traded in the markets that are, you're seeing the strength of the dollar right now with some of the things that are being done. I think the banks and a lot of the investment banks and a lot of the capital markets, this isn't a positive thing for them, right? And, and those folks, like the lobbying that is done and the purse strings that they hold, I think it's a very tough and an uphill battle for them to make something like that happen, because it does centralize the power. And there's thousands of banks, and even if you think the top 10 banks are holding 80% of deposits, it's still you still would rather have 5 than 1.
Another concern that I hear people say is, well, the government already issues all the currency, so why does it make a difference? But I think it needs to be clarified that the reason the government does issue paper currency is because when people in a free market trade with each other, the idea of paper notes was, well, we're going to standardize how much this is worth. This is worth $20, as opposed to people arguing over, well, this amount of silver is not equal to this amount of gold, or bartering systems or anything like that. But at the core of it, it was still people making voluntary transactions in a free market, whether it was exchanging goods and services with gold or with silver. The government just kind of stepped in and said, look, we're just going to issue paper currency. This is what it's going to be. Now you guys are all on a level playing field. You know exactly how much something is worth. Makes it a lot easier for commerce. That to me still leaves it as it's your property. Money is your property, meaning you should be allowed to do what you want with your property. You earn that money. There are dollars in your bank account. It's like if you own a house, if you own a computer, if you own anything, it's your personal property. But my concern is when it comes from like the central digital bank currency, you no longer own that money. It's almost like the government is giving you permission to spend a certain amount of numbers in a bank account. And then if they decide you no longer have permission, they'll just turn the off switch. Am I completely off base, or does that sound like kind of on brand with what's going on here?
I think that's what everyone's worried about, right? Is that would be what the end product would actually be, right? The paper that's out there now, there's still, I think they threw that out there, to kind of gauge reaction, right? Because you're seeing other countries start to kind of dip their toes in a little bit on this with India, obviously China. And so you're seeing that, and even there's pushback there, and people don't want to use it. I think the average account size I was reading, it's like 50 cents or something like that, right? So it's like people don't want to use these things, but I think they always kind of have to throw something out there to just say, hey, what's this reaction going to be? But I think they would probably try and issue something that they said, hey, this is on this blockchain. It could be audited, and you can see that we can't see anything right now. Whether or not people believe that, that's to be seen. But if it's a fully transparent blockchain and you can get in there and understand what the actual contract, the smart contract functionality would be, so what the code is doing on the actual blockchain, there could potentially be a world in which it's audited, where they say, hey, like this is how this thing works, and once these digital dollars are potentially on your, in your account, right? We can't see them anymore, right? But once they come back online, potentially they can see them, right? Because if I'm giving you $5, I don't know what your privacy controls are going to be, right? And you don't know what my privacy controls are going to be. So eventually there could potentially be some sort of like triangulation of where these things are at. But I think that the American people probably won't want this if they actually started to push this and make this pretty serious, and you would have a big battle with it. And I just think it's just way too disruptive to the current banking system that, we could be talking, 10, 15 years from now, potentially they would try to pull something together. But again, I think, there's other options, and like the money works pretty good right now from where things are at, as far as a pure functionality standpoint with the money.
Yeah, you raise a really good point that the bankers who are deeply tied with Washington are not going to want to relinquish control that quickly, because they have so much power and influence in Washington. JP Morgan's not going to want to go, yeah, sure, you guys take it all over. We'll go out of business. It's fine. We don't need to do banking anymore.
Yeah, they're scraping pennies, like, and that, economies of scale are good, right? It's like if someone can create an awesome business and they can create economies of scale, and they can offer a what used to be very expensive product for cheaper, and they can make a huge profit at it, everyone's benefiting from that, right? And then a lot of times that money makes its way back into a market, whether it's philanthropy or whether it's, giving, or whether it's salaries being increased, or whether it's just stimulating the economy because of growth and people are investing in those companies. To pull that much, like the banking sector is gigantic, right? Asset management is huge, it's one of the largest sectors that we have. And to try and stifle that in some way would be detrimental to the stock market and would be detrimental to a lot of these large businesses. And so it would be an extremely complicated feat to pull off, especially in a very small amount of time. They can't just be like, hey, we're going to suck all these old dollars up, and now we're only issuing CBDC dollars. So it could take a long time. And especially if it's an opt-in type thing, you're going to definitely going to get half of America that's going to say no. And then you're going to get other people that are just going to be slow adopters.
Yeah.